It's a fake, it's a hoax, it's a nowhere road where no one goes anywhere, anyhow, where you're following your heart rate down.
Hello and welcome to the Unit 2 Recorded Study Guide. This unit covers two chapters, Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, and there's a good amount of stuff to cover so we can be prepared for our test. So let's get going. It's going to follow the same routine as the last time with the Recorded Study Guide. Things will be talked about, and they are in order on your study guide, the one that you have in front of you. Hopefully they're in order. Some might jump around a little bit. You know, I do my best. But we're going to start with Sir Walter Raleigh, who is this guy right here. And, of course, he's got an awesome hat thing on and, like, this neck thing that's really great, too. And he is going to be found on page 61. We're going to look in Chapter 3, Section 1 for him. So Chapter 3, Section 1. Sir Walter Raleigh, he sets up England's first colony in America. So that's what he does. Sets up the first colonies in America. We're looking at Virginia area. He sets up the first one. It's called Virginia. Then he sets up one that's called Roanoke. Both of them fail miserably. People run out of food, they go back home, they disappear completely. Whatever the case may be, doesn't really matter. They fail horribly, and he loses all of his money. So then people start thinking, maybe I don't want to set up a colony because it's just going to make me lose a whole bunch of money, and then I won't be able to buy my sweet, awesome hats like Sir Walter Raleigh does, and his sweet little neck thing that he has. But so instead they start setting up the idea of a joint stock company, which is basically where a group of investors, they get their money together and they split the cost, and then it goes to the colony. So that's what they do when they set up Jamestown, which is on page 63 and 64. Jamestown is important because at first it follows kind of the same script as the ones that Sir Walter Raleigh was setting up. Very unsuccessful. They run out of food. Jamestown has stories about, you know, if you were in my class, we talked about people eating each other, cannibalism and stuff, and the guy that, you know, killed his wife and ate her and stuff. Yeah, so a lot of bad stuff going on in Jamestown, but eventually things turn around and it becomes England's first like permanent colony, or like a successful colony. And there are a few reasons why Jamestown becomes successful. One has to do with the next thing on your study guide, which is this guy right here. His name is John Smith. He is on page 63. Basically, he comes into Jamestown, and instead of, you know, he's got this crazy idea that instead of maybe eating people and looking for gold all the time, maybe we need to work and grow things and be able to eat. So basically he has a rule that if you don't work, you don't eat. So basically that gets people to farm, and they start not dying, which is always good. The other thing that saves Jamestown is this right here, and this is a picture of a tobacco plant. So John Smith, and along with tobacco, saved Jamestown. Tobacco is introduced. It becomes a very popular crop to grow and sell, and a lot of people in England and Europe want to buy it. So Jamestown starts becoming very wealthy because the more tobacco you grow, the more you can sell and the more money you can make. So this basically leads to people wanting to come over to the Americas and set up their own farms, but it's expensive to get over there, so some people couldn't afford to travel all the way over to America. So that's where indentured servitude comes in. This is on page 64. Basically, an indentured servant is somebody that couldn't pay their way over to America, so they would basically get passage to America from somebody else and then pay off that debt to that person over the next 5 to 7 years working on their farm in America. And then after that 5 or 7 years is up, they're free to go, and that's all great and everything like that. So a whole bunch of people come over to the Americas, to English colonies, to start farming, kind of harvesting the land around them. And that means that England now has an abundance of resources to then turn into things that can be sold. And because they have so many resources, they can sell a whole bunch of stuff. So they start practicing the idea of mercantilism, which is the next thing on your study guide, and it can be found on page 62. Mercantilism is basically you are selling more than you buy. I mean, that's basically the main idea. You are selling more goods as a country than you are buying, which means you're going to make money. So the basic idea here is that the colonies are being set up by the home country. In this picture, the home country, it'd be like England. In the colonies, you are getting like raw materials, such as a beaver pelt, which is like the fur of a beaver. So you take the raw material, like that nice little beaver right there, and you cut them up and you turn them into a hat, and then you sell it. And the more hats you sell, the more money you make. And you can sell a lot of it because there are a ton of beavers in America. This is the same with tobacco. It's the same with rice, we'll see later on. Any sort of, crop or good that you can produce a lot of, you can sell a lot of, and make a lot more money. So England would take this raw material, this beaver, turn it into a nice, awesome little hat here, and then sell it to other countries, other colonies, make money, and the whole cycle goes all the way around. And then if they need something, they can buy it from France, but they're not going to buy a whole bunch of stuff from France. So the more they sell, they're selling more than they're buying. That's mercantilism. So there's a lot of money changing hands. A lot of people, the farmers in Jamestown, are making a lot of money, but they don't always have the most say in the world, and that's where the House of Burgesses come in, because the House of Burgesses, by the way, can be found on page 64 through 65. Basically, the people in Jamestown are upset because they don't have self-government. They don't get to set their own rules, their own laws. So they want to have a little representative or self-government. And the House of Burgesses is the first form of representative government in America. And to understand the importance of this, you kind of have to understand what a representative government is. If you're in my class, we talk a lot about we give the standard example that if the school was to have a school-wide vote, instead of every single person voting, if we were to use a representative model, each classroom would pick one person to go up to the office and vote yes or no on whatever question we were asking. So the whole school was going to make a decision, yes or no, on something. And we sent, yes or no, should we use styrofoam lunch trays every day? Okay? Some people say yes, some people say no. Within the class, we would pick one person to go up to vote. Well, maybe two people want to compete to be that one person. So one person says, I will vote yes because I don't want them to use, or I want them to use styrofoam because using the trays wastes water because we have to wash them or whatever. I don't know. But that person says, I'll vote yes. And then the other person says, I vote no because styrofoam is bad for the environment, blah, 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 whatever. And so then the people in the classroom would then vote for one of those two people. Whoever got the most votes from the people in the class would be the person that goes up and votes for that class because they represent what the majority of the people in the class want. And that's basically how the House of Burgesses works, and that's basically how our government works today. The people in a state or a city or a district vote for one person to represent them, and that is a representative form of government. Now, if the person says they're going to go up and vote yes and they vote no, then the people back in the class go, hey, you didn't do a good job, we're going to pick somebody else. So they kick them out and just get somebody new. That's where the people have the power in that system. We'll talk a lot more about representative government later on, but that's the basic idea, and the House of Burgesses was the first form of representative government in America. So the people in Jamestown, they have a lot of say, they have stuff they can vote for and whatever, they're growing tobacco, having a great time, but then basically what happens is they turn the colony into a royal colony, which is basically where it is ruled by the king's officials. That's where this nice shiny crown is here. And this is on page 63, story about how it gets turned into a royal colony. But king or his officials rule the colony, and that lasts for a little bit, but then the king gives it back, and it's all good. But so yeah, that's the story of Jamestown. Now, from here, we go to the next thing on your study guide, which is Henry VIII. That's this guy right here in his little nice outfit and awesome like power stance thing he's got going on. But he is the King of England. We're going shifting time frames just a little bit. But in the in the 1500s, the Church of England is established. Okay, and this guy says that he's going to set up an established Church of England. Like the Church of England is going to be the official church of the whole country, and you should probably be a member of it, and you should agree with everything he says, or he's going to, power stance you to death. But the thing is that not everybody agrees with the Church of England. So not everybody agrees with King Henry VIII. So this story is all outlined in chapter 3, section 2 on page 67. So the people that disagreed with the Church of England would be these people that are dissenters. So they disagree with the Church of England. They are dissenters. This is also on page 67. One of the famous groups that is dissenting from the Church of England, like basically when you are a dissenter, you get persecuted, which means that you get yelled at for not believing what everybody else believes, or at least in this case what King Henry VIII believes when he set up the Church of England. So the Pilgrims, they want to separate from the Church of England, so they are known as separatists, but they are persecuted by King James. So we fast forward a little bit in time back to the time frame of Jamestown and stuff like that. So King James is the King of England right now. He's in charge of the Church of England. He wants everybody to be a member of the Church of England. He wants everybody to believe everything like that. The Pilgrims want to separate. They are called separatists at first, but then they make the journey over to America, and then they become Pilgrims. This is all talked about on page 68. So basically they're separatists at first, but then they leave. They try to go to Holland to get away from the persecution in England. They're being arrested or killed or whatever for believing different things. So now they want to go somewhere else. So they go to America. They take their little trip on the Mayflower, which is not this boat right here, because this is just a painting of what somebody thought the Mayflower probably looked like, but you get the idea. They land Cape Cod, Massachusetts, Plymouth Rock, the whole deal, and they have gotten a charter, which is a written agreement from the king. Well, they get a written agreement from the king who gave it to the Virginia Company, but they take this charter, they go to America, they land outside of the control of England, so they're not within the charter anymore, so they are like in a new territory. So they have to make up their own rules. They don't have to follow the rules of England. They set up their own stuff, and they write a document called the Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact is on page 68. Basically, it sets up self-government, and majority rule, which is, that classic, like, If we've got 9 people and 5 people vote for this and 4 people vote for that, the thing that people voted 5 times for wins. So that's majority rule, self-government. It just sets up kind of a framework for their society. That's what the Mayflower Compact is. Puritans is the next thing on your study guide. That is on page 68. The Puritans are another group that are dissenting from the Church of England. They want to reform it because they think it's way too much like the Catholic Church, and people at this time in England don't like Catholics. So they want to reform or change the church, improve it. They get persecuted. They're looking for religious freedom. They flee and they go to America and they start setting up stuff. So when we look at these two groups, these two dissenting groups, we come to this question: what was the main reason that the colonies were set up? You can kind of talk about it on page 95. That's skipping ahead a little bit, but basically there's 2 separate reasons. The first one has to do with like the colonists, like the very first people that came over, the Pilgrims and the Puritans. They are basically religious groups seeking religious freedom. The second thing you look at is, why did England start setting up more colonies after that? And basically that's just to make money. So there's two sides to this, I guess. One is for the people that first came over, religious groups seeking religious freedom. The second part is from the nation standpoint. They just want to make more cash and increase the nation's wealth. So, yeah. So more and more people start coming over. And the Puritans start establishing themselves in New England, which is one of the regions of colonies that we are talking about. And in New England, the Puritans basically run everything. They say that you have to go to church. If you don't follow the Puritan way, we will kick you out, kill you, throw you in jail, whatever, because they want it to be pure, and they want everybody to be Puritan, because if you're not Puritan, you're not pure, you're not right, so you can go die. That'd be great. So Roger Williams is a guy that says, I don't know about all that. He can be found on page 70, and basically when we look at, so because they're increasing all the wealth, making a lot of money, it's because they're making a lot of money and increasing the nation's wealth, a lot of people want to go to the Americas and live there. Some people want to go because they are seeking religious freedom. Other people want to go to make money. There's 2 different sides to this, but this kind of kicks off what is known as the Great Migration, and that is going to be on page 68. Thousands and thousands of people flood in to the New World in between 1630 and 1640, and it's just a ton of people. The population increases rapidly in the New World, especially in New England, but all over as well. But what that is going to do is, first off, it's not everybody's going to be Puritan, so the Puritans are going to get angry about that, but there's nothing really they can do. They're going to start getting outnumbered. It's just the facts. The other thing is, there are already people living in the New World. They're called Native Americans. They've been there for a long time, but the English don't really care about that. But, the Native Americans care about it, and that brings them to kind of a conflict. And the conflict that we look at in regards to this is King Philip's War. This is on page 99. This is King Philip right here. He is not an English king. He is a Native American chief, Metacom. He's the chief of the Wampanoag tribe. Basically, he's mad about this picture up here. He's mad about all these little blue, green, teal-looking arrows going in and saying 14,000 English people came to Massachusetts. Well, Massachusetts is where he lives, or around where he lives, and there's a lot of hunting ground that he uses that is being taken up by all these English people. So he doesn't like that. So he leads attacks on the English colonies. He's really successful at first, and it looks like the English colonies might just be defeated, but then the English kind of use the same strategy as Pizarro and Cortez, where they use alliances with other Native American tribes to fight Native Americans, and Metacom, or King Philip, eventually loses out. But basically it's just a time where King Philip led a little rebellion against the English colonies because he's mad about all the people showing up where he's trying to hunt and fish and just taking all of his land. So the other side of it is, yes, the Native Americans were kind of upset. They're being pushed out of their land. The other part of it is that more and more non-Puritan people are coming into New England. So that brings us to the fact that the Puritans were in charge. The Puritans said, hey, you need to go to church, you need to do this, you need to do that. If you're not Puritan, I want you to leave, or we'll throw you in jail or kill you or banish you or whatever. You got to go to church, you got to do this, you got to do that. But not everybody agrees with the Puritans. Not everybody wants to do what the Puritans do. Not everybody wants to pay taxes to the Puritan church. So one of these guys is Roger Williams. He's found on page 70. This is him right here, looking all awesome, writing something or whatever he's doing. He makes the Puritans angry because he says, hey, you don't need to go to church if you don't want to. You don't need to pay taxes to the church if you don't want to. We don't have the right to just take Native American land. All this kind of stuff that makes the Puritans really angry. So they banish him. They kick him out. He fled south, and he sets up Rhode Island and the First Baptist Church in America. He makes Puritans mad, gets kicked out, goes south, sets up Rhode Island, First Baptist Church, basically for just saying, hey, not everybody has to listen to you. Later on, the Puritans lose a lot of their power due to these things right here, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. It basically extends voting rights. Well, it can be found on page 71. Basically, it's voting rights for non-church members. And that means that not only Puritans can vote, so that means not only Puritans win, and they're not in power anymore, and they kind of lose out on things and start going crazy, and that's when the Salem witchcraft trials happen and all that kind of stuff. So that's a brief kind of look at a little bit about New England. We'll talk a little bit more about New England later on in terms of their economy and stuff, but now we will move on to talk a little bit about the Southern Colonies. And when we look at the Southern Colonies, the first thing we're looking at is this guy. His name is Lord Baltimore. He is on page 77. Lord Baltimore wants to set up a colony that is a place where Catholics can go and not be persecuted. And he sets up, obviously, Maryland, because there's a city in Maryland called Baltimore. So he sets up Maryland. It is for the Catholics, and that's the important thing that you need to know. The difference between Maryland and other colonies that we've talked about is that Maryland is a proprietary colony, which basically means that in a proprietary colony, unlike a royal colony is where a king owns it. A proprietary colony is where it is run by an owner, or owners anyway. And that would be Lord Baltimore in this case. He is a proprietor. That's what they're called, proprietor, owner. So, proprietary colony, page 78, and basically a colony run by an owner. In Maryland, he sets up people to have self-government. One of the first things they pass, it's called the Act of Toleration. That is on page 78 as well. The Act of Toleration basically outlawed religious persecution. That's supposed to be persecution. Yeah, don't worry about it. Anyway, religious persecution. Outlawed it in Maryland. Works for a little bit, but then it gets kicked out by the Puritans and stuff, and then the Catholics are outnumbered, and it's all bad for them, but don't worry, they get over it. In the South, which is where Maryland is located, the other region of colony that we're talking about, they grow a lot of cash crops, and it's mainly due to the fact they can grow a lot of warm weather cash crops in what is known as the Tidewater. The Tidewater, you can look on 81 and also 105 for explanations about what the Tidewater is. Basically, they can grow warm weather crops like tobacco, like we've already looked at. They're going to be growing rice, and they're also going to be growing indigo, which is what has to do with this woman down here. Her name is Eliza Lucas, and she introduces indigo as a cash crop. Basically, it creates a like a dye, and it colors things, and so. But anyway, all of these crops, tobacco, rice, indigo, they require a lot of labor. Okay, and because they require a lot of labor, you need a lot of workers. But at this time, they're not just going to hire people and say, "Oh, we'll give you a paycheck every week." They are going to get slaves. So because these crops require so much labor, they have a lot of slavery in the South. And slavery, basically the system of plantations and slavery, made the rich people rich and the poor people stay poor, because what do you need in order to buy good Tidewater land or a whole bunch of slaves? You already need a whole bunch of money to do those things. So if you don't have money, you don't really have a chance to really get ahead. And that makes some people angry, because those people that don't have that money, they are forced out into the frontier where they don't have very good farmland. They don't have a lot of protection from Native Americans. And that makes some people mad, namely Nathaniel Bacon. This is on page 104. Nathaniel Bacon is living out in the frontier. He wants to get some protection from the Native Americans. He goes to the governor of Virginia and he's like, "Hey man, can you give me some protection from the Native Americans? I'm dying out here." And the governor says, "No, because I don't care about you really. You're poor, and if you die, you die. So, sorry, Nathaniel." Well, Nathaniel Bacon doesn't really like that response, so he storms into Jamestown, burns the whole place to the ground. Everything's going great for him, but then he gets sick and he dies, and then the governor captures a lot of his followers, and then they are, like, 23 of them are hanged, and it's just bad news. But the governor actually just made this decision for himself and didn't really consult the king, so that gets him in some trouble. And then the House of Burgesses passed laws to make sure that royal governor, or no royal governor, can have that kind of power really ever again. But basically, the frontiersmen, people that have no land out in the frontier, lead a rebellion during Bacon's rebellion because they want protection from Native Americans. Another group of colonies is the Carolinas, or are the Carolinas. Probably not is the Carolinas. Anyway, the Carolinas, they are going to be famous for exporting a lot of rice, which we've already talked about. And again, rice requires a lot of labor. The Carolinas are at first a proprietary colony, but then they kind of don't get enough protection, or in their eyes, they don't get enough protection from Native Americans and the Spanish. So they kind of overthrow the proprietors, or the owners, because we talked about a proprietary colony is one with owners, and they kick them out, and then they become a royal colony. So the Carolinas, they have a lot of tidewater, just like we talked about earlier. Growing rice requires a lot of labor, going to have a lot of slaves. Now, Georgia is the next colony that we talk about. Georgia is found on page 80. You also need to think about James Oglethorpe when you look at this, because he founded Georgia, so this is also on page 80. James Oglethorpe and Georgia are different a little bit, because he, at first, wants to set up, first of all, he wants Georgia to be set up for the poor and people who are in debt. So he wants to not have slavery, he wants to not have plantations, because like we talked about a little bit earlier, the plantation system make the rich richer, the poor stay poor. He wants everybody to have a fresh start. He wants small farmers to be able to, have a living and do great things and make some money. But that's a great idea at first. But the people in Georgia start looking up at the Carolinas and they go, "Hey, they've got slaves and they make a lot of money. because they don't have to pay workers and they can grow a lot more stuff. Let's have slavery. Well, so eventually Georgia has slavery, but originally it's set up for the poor people, for people in debt, by James Oglethorpe, so they can have a fresh start. When we look at the South, we look at the Southern economy, and basically it's based around a few things. Basically one thing in particular, and that's slavery. So this is on page 103, 105. Basically, the Southern economy is based on plantations and slavery, because they are growing crops that require a lot of labor. They need a lot of slaves, so they have a lot of slaves. And without those slaves, their economy would be completely destroyed at this time, because they become very dependent on it. Now, we are going to look a little bit later here about how the Southern economy is different than both the Middle Colonies economy and the New England Colonies economy. In the Middle Colonies, we first start with a story about New Netherland and it turning into New York and everything like that, because you have to get an idea of what the Middle Colonies are like. The Middle Colony, or New Netherland, is set up by the Dutch. It is a very diverse place. That means a very big variety of people are coming in, and because of this diversity, you see a large amount of tolerance. It leads to tolerance. I talked about in my class, like, I compared diversity. If a good way to think about it is, in a normal classroom that we have here at the middle school, we have a very high amount of shirt diversity, which means that everybody has usually different kinds, colors, forms of shirts on. And to compare that, when we went to the moving wall, if you remember back to when we went to the moving wall, you probably saw groups from Borgia there. Well, Borgia, they have very low shirt diversity because they're all wearing the same blue polo or whatever they're wearing, and they have very low shirt diversity. There's not a lot of variety. So because we have a very high amount of diversity, if someone shows up in a really bright colored shirt, we don't really think anything of it because we're used to the differences. We tolerate or deal with or put up with that shirt. We live with it because we're used to the differences. On the other side, the low diversity at Borgia from their shirts, if somebody showed up in a bright orange shirt, they wouldn't tolerate it. It would be a big deal because they don't live with it. They're not used to it. In the Middle Colonies, there's a bunch of different types of people, different religions, different races, different ethnicities, and they all have to work together in order to succeed. And because they all work together, they all get used to each other's little differences. And that's why diversity leads to tolerance. So that's what starts out in New Netherland, but the New Netherland colony is basically right here in the middle between New England and the Southern Colonies of England. And they see them as a threat. The English see them as a threat because they are in the middle and they want to get rid of them. So they send the Duke of York, who is this guy. I don't know if you can tell, but he's got really, really awesome flowing hair. And they send the Duke of York in. This is on page 84. Into New Netherland. They take it over. They, of course, rename it New York. So New York becomes a colony where New Netherland was, and that diversity becomes part of the English Middle Colonies. Another group of people or another colony that spreads kind of the diversity is starting with this guy, William Penn. William Penn can be found on page 84. William Penn is a Quaker, and he sets up a colony for Quakers, and that would be, because his name is William Penn, his colony that he sets up is Pennsylvania, and it is for Quakers. He uses Quaker beliefs, Quaker policies, and it makes poor people in this colony very wealthy. there is no tax-supported church, so a lot of people want to go there, and because a lot of people want to go there, that means a lot of diversity grows there. That means more tolerance grows there. So when you look at tolerance in the Middle Colonies, you think of the Dutch support it at first, and then also the Quakers support it later on. So these two groups definitely spread tolerance, spread diversity, make everything very tolerant in the Middle Colonies. Now, the Middle Colonies are also growing a lot of cash crops, but they are very different in the sense of the outcome of those cash crops than the Southern Colonies. In the Southern Colonies, if you remember, we talked about they have a high need for labor, so they have a lot of slaves. Now, in the Middle Colonies, they are growing different sets of cash crops. They are mainly growing grains, and that is why they are known as the breadbasket colonies, because they grow a lot of grains. Now, because they're growing so many grains, they are known as the breadbasket colony because they produce so much that they provide for basically all of the colonies. But grains do not require as much labor, so you do not see as many slaves. So the difference here is they are not dependent on slavery like the Southern Colonies are. And that's just because the crops they're growing don't require as much labor. And also, it comes from they don't use slaves as much because they're more tolerant, they're more diverse, it's a different kind of society. Only 7% of the population was enslaved, which is a very small number compared to the number in the South. So that is a thing to look at when you think about the Middle Colonies, breadbasket, whole bunch of grains, not a lot of slavery. We move on to go back around to talk about the New England Colonies and their economy. The New England Colonies, their economy, we're looking page 95 or so. Basically, they are all focused around that idea. If you remember back to the beaver turning into the hat, they're taking that raw material and manufacturing it into something else because they have to make a living some other way besides farming. In the Middle Colonies and the Southern Colonies, they can farm, they can make money off of it. In the New England Colonies, they can't because they don't have very good soil. They have to do subsistence farming, which is where you only grow enough for yourself, and that's because they don't have as much good soil. So they are basically going to be built around trade and manufacturing, taking that raw material, turning it into whatever, and selling it. This also leads to, because they have so much trade, this form of trade that they do is the triangular trade, which is on page 98. And that is important because it increases a lot of the trade that's going on. Basically, it's the movement of the finished goods, and rum and iron goes down to Africa. They trade those things for slaves. They get more slaves to work in the West Indies, and then those slaves produce more raw materials. They send those up to New England. They produced, and then, just a lot of trade going on out of the New England colonies. And England wants to make sure that they get their fair share, in their opinion. And that's why they introduce these new laws called the Navigation Acts, which is on page 97. And the Navigation Acts basically say a few things like you can't ship things to other countries without paying a tax, or you can't ship tobacco to any country, period. You have to ship it to England. Basically, this is to ensure that England makes money. The Navigation Acts are basically set up to make sure that England gets the most money off its colonies that it can. And they work relatively well, but the fact is it makes people really angry, and that's what we see when we see the increase in piracy and smuggling, like a lot of people did their A-level over. The Navigation Acts are a good root cause of that because they force people to try to get around the laws. And, Navigation Acts. All right, so the last region of colonies that we look at are the back country. The back country is the back country. I'm having trouble with R's and is's and whatnot. But anyway, okay. The back country is on page 118, along with the fall line and stuff about the Scots-Irish, but we'll get to all that. The backcountry is basically a region of colonies that runs through, strangely enough, the back side of the other colonies, the middle colonies, the southern colonies. It's a very wild, rugged place. There are a lot of Native Americans, and they have to fight for their lives if you're living out there in an English settler. So you have to have a lot of good survival skills. Well, the backcountry begins at the fall line, because at the fall line there's waterfalls and large ships can't go upstream anymore because you can't take a large ship up a waterfall. Shocking, I know. So you don't have a lot of supplies back there, and it's just not that great. So you don't have a lot of support either. So you have to be able to defend yourself. And the people that are out there that are defending themselves well are the Scots-Irish, and they find a home in the backcountry because A, they don't have a lot of money, so they have to live out there, and B, they can survive out there because they have the survival skills they need, because where they came from was very war-torn, and they had to have survival skills. So the Scots-Irish are the main immigrant group, or the main group in the backcountry. So that's basically everything on your study guide, except for the B-level questions, which we will move on to right now. Like always, we have talked a lot about the basic ideas of the B-level questions already throughout the recorded study guide, but we'll just hit them really quick here. New Englanders profited from the triangular trade. You got to look at page 98, look at that chart, look how, they're using slave labor, like what are they doing, what are they selling, what products are moving from place to place. How did Native Americans react to colonial growth? We talked a great deal about that because of King Philip's War. That's an obvious place to go when you look at the reaction of the Native Americans to colonial growth, King Philip's War. How did the House of Burgesses strengthen colonist rights after Bacon's rebellion? Well, they take away a lot of power from the royal governor because the royal governor hanged all those people. They take away that power, which gives rights to the people, because House of Burgesses, first representative form of government, if they're the ones making the laws and making the judgments, the people have the power. Why did the Scots-Irish immigrate to the colonies? Well, their homeland was incredibly war-torn. They wanted to get away from that. They come to the colonies. They are looking for a new life. They find it in the backcountry. It's not exactly what they want, but they have the survival skills to survive. Explain how English colonial growth affected other groups in Native American. In North America, I would bring that back to the Native Americans. I would talk about King Philip's War, but then also talk about the French and the Spanish and what conflicts could arise as the English expand into the frontier. Compare and contrast the benefits and risk of European colonization. What was Sir Walter Raleigh risking, and what could he benefit when he put up all of his money to start a colony? Yeah, you can make a lot of money. How could he make a lot of money? And then talk about how he could lose all of his money, the risk and benefits. How did the experience of the early colonists shape Americans' political and social ideas? You talk about the House of Burgesses, you talk about town meetings, you talk about all that kind of stuff. You talk about why they came over in the first place. They came over because they're looking for tolerance and to escape persecution, and they want to set up a society that is similar to those ideas. So, how did the Puritans weave democracy into their political and religious life? That goes back to town meetings and congregations voting for things. Like congregation is like part of a church. Why did slavery expand in the Southern Colonies? They had the Tidewater. They grew warm weather crops, required a lot of labor. A lot of labor requires a lot of slaves because they want to make more money. Why did toleration continue to grow in the Middle Colonies? Well, because of that increased diversity. We talked about the shirt diversity. It's the exact same thing. So you talk about, with the increased amount of diversity, people have to deal with and live with others in order to succeed, and eventually those differences just kind of fade into the background. All right, well, that is the study guide for Unit 2. We will have an online study session tonight on the Facebook page and Twitter accounts. If you want to join in that, you should have turned in a letter, and that'll start at 7:30. Get online, start watching the video on your own on YouTube, and start asking questions as the video plays. You can either post them to the wall on the Facebook page or tweet a question at the Twitter account. Either way is fine with me, and good luck studying and good luck on the test.